Okay, hello. My name is Jason Avramanko. I've been a teacher for about 20 years, half of which I've probably spent teaching social studies grade 9, more or less. But they're coming out with a new curriculum in a couple years. I'm piloting it in about a month. And the last 2 weeks, I've been looking through the curriculum, which I'll pull up now. Grade 9, and they organize it knowledge, understanding, skills, and procedures that students need to know, and that's fine. The way they organize it here is obviously one method. You could look at it or organize. I have been struggling with how to kind of organize the curriculum and organize the different the structure. A thematic makes sense sometimes, like anything that has to do with economics, you put in, you teach those together. Anything that has to do with rights, anything that has to do with like decision making, so government and such, maybe that could be in a different. So you could do thematic. I feel like this curriculum is a lot heavier with like dates and places and events, and so for me chronological makes a lot more sense. So I've been going through the curriculum, and I cut it up and I place it in different places, and I've reorganized a lot of it, and I came up instead with a chronological look. So I've broken up their curriculum and I put it into I did it chronologically instead. And I thought of doing it, you could do like, where are we now and how did we get here? So you could do backwards chronologically and start today and go all the way back. But I decided that would be very confusing for students. And sometimes I also feel like not only confusing for students, but you wouldn't understand how you got there. And I know that's the point, is that you're questioning, wait, so here we are now, but how did we get here? Oh, well, let's look into that. This is how we got here. Well, how did we get here? And then you go back. And I get that, but I also know that for a 13, 14-year-old, I feel like moving in one direction in my mind makes a lot more sense. And I also know that in grades, and I don't the grade 7 curriculum also kind of did what happened previous, right? So they're already coming with hopefully some background about what happened before, and I feel it'd be easier to move in that one direction. At least that's where I'm at now. But again, this is actually only after 2 weeks of looking through this. So you know what, if you have some better ideas, I'm open to them. These are just my ideas. Okay, so I had AI take all my ideas and put them into a nice slideshow. So I'm going to open that up right now. Okay, so here's my slideshow that I did, and for technical reasons I can't draw on it because, well, I'm in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. So whatever, for reasons, I can't draw on it, but hopefully you can see my cursor here. And I'm doing, so I called them phases because I don't want students to think of these as units, because again, really latching on to this idea of not having any one answer, that it's all connected, is really big for the vision I have for this. Therefore, I've called them phases instead. We're moving through phases of Canada, but not units. Like we didn't end. We didn't stop at the end of the unit and then you just like that compartmentalize. I don't want them to compartmentalize. I want them to see how it's a staircase, how it's all interconnected, how one domino hits the rest. And I like the domino and staircase analogy. I'm going to probably be using a lot. And I want them to answer one question through the whole year. And so the question I came up with was this one here, the starting question: what is Canada and who gets to decide? So what is Canada? How is it being defined? But then who's deciding that? Who's making that definition? That's really big for me, like whose voice is heard in this definition. So the 7 phases I have, and that's the question that they have at the beginning, and I'm going to be asking them that at the beginning. And I have some, I came up with some, I don't have an assignment or a project for every single one, but like some, like before they know anything, or like based on their prior knowledge, I'm going to ask them like, okay, answer the questions. Canada is what? Canada became Canada when? People with power in Canada include. Something Canada should be proud of is. One question I have about Canada is. And then I'm going to have them like choose an image or an object or a quote, symbol, or something that represents Canada. And then, so that's like at the beginning. I might have them do the exact same thing at the end. So, okay. So the question they're answering throughout all this is, and then I'm going to come back to regularly, is what is Canada and who gets to decide that definition? And of course at the beginning, because it's all chronological, we're starting at like 1920, okay? We're starting at 1920. And phase 1 is that idea of the Balfour Declaration, the Statute of Westminster, where we're told we have it. Like it's put down in law that we now have independence. And is it being written on paper, is that what made us independent? Was that the thing? We are now independent because it's on a piece of paper. And who's deciding that? Britain's deciding that. Women don't even have the vote. So are women deciding what is Canada? Who's defining it at the beginning? In 1920, we're being defined by the English, by Britain. Canada's defined by the other, by we are other. Britain decides who we are, France decides who we are, but we're not deciding who we are. Canadians aren't deciding who we are. And then, so that's, okay. Next, how am I going to teach the course? You can look through this if you want. I put this in here, but now I don't think you're here for this, but I'm going to have them like investigate evidence and then make a decision. And then I'm going to give them simulations. So they're going to simulate, okay, I've made these decisions based on this evidence. And now through a process of going through a simulation or playing the role of a council member or playing the role of a cabinet minister or playing the role, whatever the role is, an advocate, then, how would your decision play out in this way, and then forming a judgment on that. And that might be all group work on that side, but then I want them to individually reflect on this and give their answer, which then I want their peers to be critical of each other, ask questions of each other about their decision, which of course will hopefully have them revise with their new evidence, and then they can investigate it. It's all cyclical. Okay, moving on. How I say, this slide's even more boring than the last one. Maybe you care about how I plan on assessing all this, and there's obviously collaborative elements, but also individual. And this, to be fair though, remember, the curriculum requires knowledge and understanding, but also procedure, right? Like skills and procedure. And so you have to make sure that in your assessment, the skills and procedure part, that's going to be part of what you're assessing. And again, you can look through this should you want, or ask questions. But here, let's get into the curriculum as it is. So my phase one is like becoming independent and more democratic. So again, I have this staircase up here. And I saw the Balfour Declaration, the Statute of Westminster, that we're gaining autonomy through this. You also have the democratic changes. So women, the famous 5 persons case, like they're advocating for more voice, and all of this is more democratic, independent. And this is part of the definition. Who's defining what Canada is? Well, Canada is now taking on its own role, defining who it is. But also women are asking to be part of that defining a new Canada. They are asking for a voice in deciding what and who Canada is. So Britain gives us those, but it's a staircase. Again, I want them to argue. I want them to think about and struggle with the concept of can you be given independence, or do you have to take it, right? Like okay, Britain gives us, but then they still have the power even in that relationship by giving us independence. So when do we actually become independent? And I don't believe it's any one moment. I'm not going to tell them that, but I want them to see that independence is a staircase, is a series of events that all lead to some form of independence. But as we move on, I may be jumping ahead, but here, just hear me out, because I want them throughout to realize that what does it even mean to define independence? What does it mean to be independent? Because right in today's world, we have the United States. The United States puts tariffs on Canada and Canadian goods, and suddenly the value of our dollar changes, employment changes, immigration changes, all because of these tariffs. And does that mean we're not independent? Like literally decisions made in the United States are changing our culture, our economy, our people, our decision making, right? So decisions that are made outside, being part of NORAD, being part of an international community and alliances and stuff, are clearly put pressures on us and make us or force us in certain directions. And so do we have independence in a global world that's so interconnected? So that's also a question I want them to struggle with throughout this. So I have them building this staircase. I want them to run like a newsroom. You'll see at the bottom their student tasks. I want them to run a newsroom about the person's case, about like the famous 5, the women's rights. And this is a writing task. Canada's too free. It doesn't matter what it is. But I had some ideas down there. I'm trying to move on. Okay, phase 2. So you've moved through this. And that was like World War I. And then we're going to talk about like the Great Depression, how the Great Depression happened, and how. So this would be, if you're doing a thematic approach, this would be under economics probably. But again, for me, this chronological makes sense because you just got this independence, but now your government is going to have to step up. So you have your independence. Now, what are you going to do with it? What do you want government to do? How much power do you want to give government? Do you want government to intervene? Because we have overproduction, failing. And this is, again, this domino. You see at the bottom of student tasks, I have a domino lab. So I'm going to show that it's a chain. These dominoes hit each other, but they continue hitting each other. And so I want them, one of my assignments is I I'm getting together like 16 right now. I have 16 like cards, and I want them to show arrows about how one thing happens. Well, how does that affect? And again, they are going to come up with these ideally, and then I'll guide them as I feel necessary. But ideally, they'll come up with these cards and show how they're all interlinked and how one will affect others. So how collapsing trade affects the money here, and then they can't hire people, and that unemployment, which is poverty, and so the people who are impoverished can't buy anything, so there's falling demand. But and so are you gonna scale back production? And then of course you also can talk about crops and the conditions around that during this time, but like how it's all interconnected. And I'm gonna have these 16 cards and show all the arrows, but then they are going to take the role. So they're going to there at the bottom, student task, I have an emergency cabinet. So where they're going to be, they have to choose how much government involvement they want to participate in, and then where. So they'll put in like different cards, I call them cards, different cards into the system, and where do those lines go, and how do they break lines so that the domino effect is less impactful, or like you can somehow stop it. But as a cabinet, like you only have so many points or dollars or how economic or political capital to spend, and so you have to choose what's the priority here. Where are you going to step in, and where do we want government to step in? Because that also takes away individual independence. So if you have a bigger government, they can do more, but then you lose independence individually. And so this is all like I want to see them to see this. And so students are going to model the Depression as an interconnected system. It's not a list to memorize, that's not the point, but that these systems are connected. And it still happens today, right? Like obviously I'm going to, even though I'm doing this chronologically, I'll still talk about today and how like these tariffs, why do these tariffs hit us? Because again, even though I'm doing this chronologically, there's still thematic play, and I still want to talk about what's going on in current events. Current events is still part of the curriculum. Okay, so phase 3. So this is World War II. Obviously, for some students, this can be very exciting because they want to talk about Dieppe and D-Day and all this stuff, and that's great, and you should talk about it. But again, this is not about like a parade. You see at the very bottom of the slide, the goal is not a parade of dates, but a judgment about how war has changed Canada. So how does this war? But I also, so I want them to decide. Again, I have ideas, but I want them to decide at first what makes a contribution legitimate. Like, so how students judge contribution. Now this is what I came up with. I'm hoping they come up with one that I haven't thought of. I'm sure they won't think of all the ones I have, and maybe I'm wrong, or maybe mine aren't as impactful, and maybe they'll think of a 7th one that I haven't thought of, about like what makes a contribution. So why was Dieppe? Why was it our commitment? Was it the fact that Canada was willing to fully commit to this war, that they threw themselves into it? Was it the effect that that Dieppe had on the overall war? Was it our agency? So the fact that we made our own decisions, that we had our own generals, was that an impact? Did that show a contribution from an independent nation? Or was it historical? The human cost. This is one that I was thinking, like, if in a battle Canada participated in, if Canada didn't lose any soldiers or a negligible amount, is it seen as much as a sacrifice? Does there need to be sacrifice in order for the rest of the world to see it as a commitment, to see it as a contribution? Like if you lose, half of your contingent in taking a hill or whatever, or in fight, whatever, like, is that, as tragic as this sounds, I think that human cost plays a role in the contribution we feel something has. And then the strength of the evidence. I want to talk, what I mean by strength of evidence is I want them also to realize that storytelling is also plays a role here in judging contribution. So when we look back and we see, and this is all part of the curriculum, by the way, like if you go back, and I'm not going to show you all the connections, but we can talk about that if you want. But if something is embellished, does that diminish its power of its contribution? And does it diminish, because again, the question we're coming back to is, what is Canada? So do we define ourselves partially on the stories we tell? And is that so wrong? Like, where is that line between embellishing Canada as a peaceful nation or as a polite nation? How much does that play a role about us lying to ourselves, or the world seeing us in a certain light that may not be completely true? How problematic is that? Do we feel that's problematic? Do we feel that symbols have a role? Whether that symbol is as honest as we'd like it to be, we can recognize that, but we can still celebrate the symbol, perhaps. Okay, so this is World War II. And of course, after World War II, you have Canada massive growth. This is post-war growth, building a modern Canada, right? So I like this question here. Wow, oops. Did post-war growth make Canada better or merely bigger and more complicated? So I want them to decide like, oh man, we had all these people now streaming in. So lots of immigration, the huge population growth, but then you have the cities trying to handle all these people. So the growth of suburbs and such, and industry and resources are being upscaled. And is that good, or is it just more complicated and more environmentally damaging? Because then you have also our social programs. Can they keep up? Like our medical, our schooling, etc. Can they keep up with all of this massive growth and massive change in the immigration population? And again, this all changes our identity. What is Canada if you're bringing in a lot of immigrants who don't have necessarily the exact same belief systems or social concepts as we do? And then, of course, what is our role in the world now? Now that we've participated in World War II and we're seen as an independent nation, all right, well, how does the world see us? And this is us joining the world stage, right? NORAD and such, right? This is, the NATO and such later on, but like, yes. And so this is the student tasks. I want them to do like a forecast, 1945 forecast. They predict population, economic challenges. So again, I don't want to give them all this. I want them to guess what would happen after post-war, like what's going to happen. And then we're going to talk about the push and pull factors of immigration, the barriers and what supports and what agency and policies need to be placed. This comes back to the whole idea of government. Like how big of a government do we want? How much government involvement do we want? And of course, then progress has consequences. So on the other side, you have jobs and housing and infrastructure, all this. Maybe I'll make like a poster. So the front side of the poster is all the good things about growth, but on the back side, you have all the areas where you're going to have where the consequences of all that growth. So one side of the poster, you have all the positives, and the other side is all the negatives, essentially. And I want them to be city planners. Or one of the other tasks is to be a city planner. And as a city planner, you again have only a certain amount of money or points. I'll give them the point systems. And like, if do you want to put your points into schooling, into housing, into your economy, because then the economy, if it grows fast enough, it can produce maybe that school, and you can get the resources from that and more. Do we where would we put our points? And again, I haven't planned out every assignment, but yes, this is going to be phase 4 of 7, and this is 5 of 7. So we just went through this explosion, and now we're in this is like 60s, the 1960s and onwards and such. So one country, but we have competing ideas. So what happens when different groups offer different answers to the question, what is Canada? Coming back to that question. So you have different groups. You have changing immigration, multiculturalism, Quebec nationalism comes in, the October crisis, etc. Petroleum in the National Energy Program, which is important to Alberta curriculum, obviously. Free trade, Western alienation. We also have residential schools in the 60s, scoop, which you have to handle with care when these come in. So you have to handle that stuff with care, because residential schools, the 60s scoops, these are taught as systems that have caused documented intergenerational harm. Yes, be conscious of that. Canada students, I want students to repeatedly revise the definition of Canada, because we are always redefining it, and all of these things make a difference. How do we see ourselves, and how are other people seeing us, and how are we trying to get it? So this is like Quebec especially, and how that is going to play into Western alienation as well. Quebec doesn't see itself as being like Canada is trying to define itself as one thing, and Quebec doesn't like that definition. It doesn't see itself in that definition. So what are its options? Should it just like conform to the Canadian definition that's slowly being formed by the rest of Canada, or should it reject it? How can it wedge itself in there to ensure that this Canadian definition includes, or they can agree with it? And the same with the West, right? The West does not feel like the Canadian definition is a Western definition. They don't feel like that's part of them, or at least some people in the West feel that way. And so how do you mitigate that? And so this is really quite relevant, obviously, in Alberta and such. Okay, moving on. 6, who actually has power? Okay, we're coming to the end now here. And so this is where we're going to teach about the federal system. So legislative branch, judicial branch, executive branch. And so this is like, okay, so we have all these immigrants and we have all these voices. Well, how are those voices structured to actually make change, right? So citizens have their representatives, elections and ridings and parliament. And if you've taught the old grade 9 curriculum, this part This part you'll know very well. This is one of the parts that haven't changed as much. So you have your cabinet and prime ministers making laws, and of course then the judicial branch keeping that balance. And on the side here, on the right-hand side, students are going to investigate what does responsible government really means. How do we have confidence in these institutions? Natural resource jurisdiction. Again, this is part of the new curriculum in Alberta because it's become a hot topic. Alberta being an oil and petroleum province, who implements these laws, and of course that's the executive branch, if you know your government, who reviews it, that's our judicial branch primarily, and who answers for it, and that comes down to, ideally our politicians answer for it in the next election, etc. So, and I'm going to have them do a power audit on all this, do we like this balance of power, etc. And so here's my final phase that I've talked about: right, citizenship, and an unfinished project. So I like this idea that Canada's unfinished. We don't have a definition. We don't have one set of definitions. It's an unfinished project. We continue working on it. And I want them to come up with that unfinished, but a commission. They're not completing the project. They're not making the unfinished project finished, but a commission on what questions need to be asked in order to move forward with this, etc. So right, citizenship, unfinished project. Who belongs in Canada? What rights should that belonging protect? This is where we see the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So now that we have this government and we're trying to define Canada, well, is the individual defined in this greater thing? Who has voices? What independence do the individuals have? Like, we have an independent Canada, do we? What is that? What does independent Canada mean? Well, same thing about the citizens of Canada. What does independence mean to these citizens? Each citizen is independent, but are you really? You're not allowed to. You have laws that restrict you, and even rights and freedoms. You have all these freedoms, but even those are restricted. In what way, right? Reasonable limits, emergency powers. Obviously, the notwithstanding clause is a big one in Alberta now, since we've invoked it so many times. And how do you change the Constitution? It's supposed to be a living tree that can change and be adapted. That's great. On the other side here, I just have advocacy and more words. So many things here. I'm not going to get into all of it, and I really would love to talk about some of the assignments I have in mind. And I'm going to have them, the culminating stuff. I want them to do this unfinished project commission, which again I've started to develop. I have some ideas for it, but that's not till June. So, and actually, I say that, but I have a partner teacher, and my partner teacher and I haven't even talked about this. So none of this might stay the same. She might be like, "No, I saw it this way," and then she'll blow my mind, and I'll be like, "Oh, right you are." I disagree with all the work I've done. And then final judgment, of course, how complete and fair is Canada's promise of equal citizenship? And of course, we go back to that original question, which is, how would we now define Canada, and who's doing the defining? All right, so all of this is to say that the new curriculum has its strengths for sure, obviously, and it can be organized in a good way. And yes, I would love if anyone could link to some resources that they've been creating for it. I was going to, where was this one? This is the judicial branch. How to become a citizen. There's some good assignment. Yeah, I had the 4 corner verdicts about how did Canada become independent, like arguing about what was the most important step towards independence, because Canada independently declaring war, but you also have the Balfour and the Westminster declarations, etc. Our wartime contributions, like which one was important and why. The domino effect thing. I'm going to revisit that multiple times, actually. Post-war stuff. What did I have again? I had 6 evidence stations for what happens post-war. So when people returning home, new Canadians, cities are not yet ready. Factories have to change. Citizens want security, but the world is still dangerous, right? Soviet Union and stuff. And so studying those 6 things, and then we're going to pretend we're our own cabinet and we have to make priorities and such, and where is our priority? I think maybe I did talk about that. The push-pull tactic. Okay. Good luck to everybody teaching the new curriculum in 2 years. If you're piloting it as well, great. But if you have questions or comments, or you have some contributions to this conversation, please, because again, none of this, I don't teach it for another 2 weeks here, or 2.5 weeks, and nothing here is for sure. But hopefully you got something out of this conversation. Please enjoy and good luck.